The remnants of the Trump era will stay with us forever. Many leftists like to say, remember who supported the Cheeto dictator. Don't let them escape this. They've repeatedly called for former Trump administration officials to not be able to get jobs. They've said that certain businesses shouldn't work with anyone who supported Donald Trump. Yes, that may be a strong remnant of the Trump era. These cultist resistance type people who just want to stop anyone who supported the president from living, at least in civil society, as they like to say. But we're also going to see remnants in the media because the stink will never wash away. You see, look, I can talk to somebody who voted for Hillary Clinton, and I get it, whatever. We can carry on and do business if it benefits both parties and, the greater community. There's always some consideration there. I can work with someone who voted for Trump, Ron Paul or Joe Jorgensen or whoever, and be like, look, we have to move on from these things. However, we take a look at some of these journalists and we can see the stain and the stink that will never leave, notably Jim Acosta and others like him, people like Brian Stelter, who sacrificed any shred of credibility they had to pander to grift, as it were. Jim Acosta says journalists are dealing with post-Trump stress disorder. Let me repeat that. That is quite literally PTSD, post-Trump stress disorder. I get it. Jim, you have nothing to offer people. All you did was grandstand and parrot garbage opinions from, based on stories that were usually half-truths at best. You stood up and you yelled at Trump instead of asking him legitimate questions about why things are happening and what we can do about them. You would often refuse to sit down because you were more interested in berating a president instead of actually doing something. You see, Jim Acosta discovered the ultimate grift. He was given this position, being in the White House press corps, or, being there in front of the president during his press briefings, to effectively channel symbolic rage from people who watch CNN and other fake news outlets and then, attack the president verbally to give some emotional satisfaction to these people. As people like Brian Stelter and others at CNN pump out ridiculously fake news or falsely framed narratives, many regular Americans got angry. Jim Acosta was then there to take that anger, yell at Trump about some nonsense, and then have those people be satiated and calm down. Thank you, CNN. Think about that. CNN was whipping these people up into a frenzy, and then CNN was the one acting like they were the heroes here to help you. We have a poll now from 538 that exemplifies a lot of what's going on in the media and a lot of what happens here on the Timcast channel. Now, I want to read to you about what Jim Acosta says, and I'll read for you this. But first, this graph. Republicans really don't trust the media, saith 538. Democrats currently hold a 73% trust in media, independents a 36%, and Republicans 10%. You know what I see when I see this chart? Democrats overwhelmingly believe the media. Independents and Trumps and Republicans both don't, in for the most part. Most independents do not trust the media. Only 36% do. Share of respondents by party who said they trusted mass media a great deal or a fair amount. Not even a fair amount. Amazing. That's a large number of people. 64% of moderates. You know what this shows me? The Democrats are in a cult. They're being fed ridiculous lies and they just believe it. So how do we break them out of that? Honestly, I don't know. Certainly this video won't be doing it. This video is more, confirmation bias for those who already know the media is bad. Washington Examiner reports CNN's Jim Acosta said reporters are experiencing post-Trump stress disorder following the former president's exodus from the White House. Quote, when you're asking me if I was run down, I thought you were referring to how I felt during the Trump era. Jim Acosta told CNN chief media correspondent Brian Stelter when he was asked about how he was feeling so far in President Joe Biden's term. Quote, I think we're all dealing with some post-Trump stress disorder. Other than that, happy Easter, he was saying in those statements a few days ago. Acosta's happy Easter mention was in reference to a Sunday morning message from former President Trump in which he railed against radical left crazies and touched on the so-called rigged November election, so saith Trump. Happy Easter to all, including the radical left crazies. I'm not going to read this, but he said they were trying to destroy the country. On Saturday, the former president wrote, for years, the radical left Democrats have played dirty by boycotting products when anything from that company is done or stated in any way that offends them. Now they're going big time with woke cancel culture and our sacred elections. It is finally time for Republicans and conservatives to fight back. We have more people than they do by far, capping off the message with Happy Easter. Acosta, who was CNN's chief White House correspondent during the Trump years before becoming chief domestic correspondent, also spoke on moving forward from Trump's presidency and possibly limiting the amount of coverage he receives while he resides at his Mar-a-Lago resort. Quote, in terms of stacking shows and what comes first and what comes second, Brian, you and I know this all too well. We did cover the news before Trump came along, and we did it pretty well. Really. He says, and there's going to be plenty of stuff in the news out there that doesn't have to have President Donald Trump in the headlines for us to continue to exist, especially when he's putting out these statements. He added that Trump has engaged in and continues to display behavior beneath the executive office. When he was president, he was doing things that were beneath the office of the presidency, he said. Now he's doing things beneath the office of the post-presidency. He's not going to change, but we need to change with the times. Stelter, while referencing Trump's recent string of statements mentioning claims of fraud that have been rejected by the courts and election officials, said, it is important to note the big lie is still alive and well in the pro-Trump bubble. I feel like it went away after the riot and reality reared its head, but no, the big lie is out there in the pro-Trump bubble. Sure, because Brian Stelter won't give this up. You notice how he used that phrase, the big lie. He's doing that because it's a rhetorical tool. It's a manipulation technique. The big lie, he says. Right. The reality is that there are some issues, but Trump got Ocean's 11, as I put it. Anybody who was paying attention could see what happened, and I don't think there's any real reason to even rehash a lot of the stuff. We know the rules changed a year before, in the fall of 2019. In Pennsylvania, for instance, they changed a lot of rules, and as Sean Parnell said, Democrats were making these changes because they thought it would benefit them in the election. Republicans didn't pay attention to this, and, well, they got caught off guard. Trump did gain a lot of votes. Joe Biden got more. But I digress. Regardless of that, we know that you can see all of this very much so in the media. Take a look at how many people who are independent who trust the media. 36% say they trust the media a great deal or a fair amount. Only 10% of Republicans. Yes, there is a decent amount of Republicans who believe in, who believe Trump outright, usually no matter what he says. I'm not saying it's even 10%, but there's a lot. Very, very zealous Trump supporting individuals. There are then independents and people like me, people like James Lindsay, for instance, who mentioned, I think James voted for Trump. I'm not entirely sure, but I did. And I did so for a variety of reasons I've talked about quite a bit. Legitimate policy reasons, school choice, Trump's trying to end the Afghani war and bring our troops back to the United States. The ban on critical race theory, these are very, very important things. We also had a booming economy. I thought that made sense, and I didn't want the establishment back in power. So I fall in that category of independents who mostly do not trust the media. Only 36% do. If you do, you'll probably believe many things that are completely incorrect. Now, there are even less Trump supporters, which means there's even a gap between independents and Trump supporters. Take a look at that 73% Democrats. They're in a cult. They believe Brian Stelter. They hang on his every word. When he says, don't listen to the other news outlets, they listen to MSNBC. They hear the nonsense. And they hear the other big lie. When they tell us about, and I say big lie, but big lies is probably better. Like, I don't know, Trump-Russia collusion. To me, that's the biggest of the lies because they carried that for years. They won awards for it. And it was just not true. There's also the Black Lives Matter narrative about cops going around hunting people down, which we know also is just not true. The Democrats push these psychotic lies. And now post-Trump stress disorder. Yeah, your ratings are in the gutter. That's a good thing for this country. Well, here's how 538 frames it. Why being anti-media is now part of the GOP identity. I love this so much. 538. It's part of the GOP identity. Independent voters also don't trust the media. So perhaps it's you in the cult. Y'all are trapped. I love when I see those posts on on Reddit and stuff, and they're like, Trump supporters are in a cult. Nah, hold on there, my friend. You're referring to a subsection of Trump supporters who very much are in a cult of personality. That I believe, 100%. Many of them believe ridiculous things about conspiracies and other crazy stuff. But it's a small percentage, very small, because the prominent Trump supporters have rather mainstream opinions. Though they have conservative opinions, they are mainstream. Ben Shapiro, for instance, rather run-of-the-mill, to be completely honest. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. Ben Shapiro personifies the mainstream, regular old conservative in much of the ways we've come to expect from conservatives. However, he's actually a bit more libertarian, not perfect. And so he's more tolerable to moderates because he's like, let me do my thing and you do yours. Okay. He talks about how he doesn't agree with Dave Rubin, but they're friends and they can get along. Hey, that's exactly what we moderates are looking for in this country. So you want to say it's part of the GOP identity? No, I'm sorry. It's just not a part of the Democrat identity. The Democrat identity is just believe what CNN says. Meanwhile, moderates and Republicans are kind of like, yo, we don't agree policy-wise, but these people are nuts. Case in point, that's why you see channels like mine, where they're like, Tim, you sure do rag on Democrats all the time. Yo, the Democrats and the media seem to be walking in lockstep and lying most of the time. And anybody who's paying attention, who's being honest, will tell you this. What can I say of Republicans? They suck too, but they don't do all that much. Obstruct, I guess. Now they're not in power. What am I going to say about them? Here's what 538 says. There's little question that the media is one of the least trusted institutions in Republican circles. My friends over at 538, Meredith, who wrote this, the media is actually one of the least trusted institutions, period. We've seen that poll time and time again. In the past 2 decades, trust in traditional media has plummeted, especially among Republicans, according to polling from Gallup. Since at least the late 1990s, Republicans have been less likely than Democrats to say they trust the media. But starting in 2015, trust among Republicans took a nosedive, falling from 32% to 10% in 2020. Meanwhile, among Democrats, trust in the media has actually climbed back up quite a bit. Why? It's fairly obvious. You can see that in about 2016, Democrats were below 60% in terms of trusting the media. It spiked up to just under 80, and now it's at 73%. They hated Donald Trump. The media kept telling them that Donald Trump was bad, and they bought into that narrative, and they started believing it. Then they started feeding them that it was that feedback loop of Donald Trump is evil. We're going to stand up to Donald Trump. Thank you for telling us how evil he is because we're biased, and thank you for then standing up to him. They created that feedback loop of addiction, and it worked really well for them. Now they're suffering from post-Trump stress disorder. We called that Trump derangement syndrome, but sure, there's got to be a name for it now that Trump's gone, right? Right. They're going to say Republicans have been less likely than Democrats, falling 10% from 32. Part of this is because Republicans are often more vocal in their criticisms of the media and have long perceived it as having a liberal bias, which is a fact. But now they are also more likely to say that being anti-media is part of their political identity. This is likely driving the staggering gap in the media trust that we are seeing. Let's start with Republicans' media habits. In our fractured media ecosystem, it's not uncommon for both Republicans and Democrats to seek out news sources that reinforce their political beliefs. Full stop. That is true. And as a new study finds, exposure to media that is partisan, whether liberal or conservative, reduces people's overall trust in the mainstream press, regardless of political party. But what sets Republicans apart at this point is their steady reliance on just one source for all their news, Fox News. In its study of the media landscape in the lead up to the 2020 presidential election cycle, the Pew Research Center found that of the 30 news sources it asked about, only Fox News was trusted by a majority of Republicans. And there we go. Baby, I love it. You ask someone, here are 30 news sources, which ones do you trust? And the conservatives overwhelmingly say Fox News. So 538 says they only get their news from one source, which is a lie. Let's play a game, my friends. It's called Break Down the Lie. They say, let's start with Republicans' media habits, blah, blah, blah. We read this. A new study, it finds exposure to media as partisan, whether liberal or conservative, reduces people's overall trust. What sets Republican apart at this point is their steady reliance on just one source for all their news. 538. Did you stop to consider one very important fact? They were only given 30 options. Was Steven Crowder an option? Maybe. Was Tim Pool an option? Perhaps. Were the Young Turks even an option? Yeah, more likely than not, I think the Young Turks might have been an option. Could it be that these people are getting their news from a variety of different sources that are not mainstream or establishment press? Could it be that many of these people are not just relying on Fox News, but in fact a variety of other independent news channels and creators? Could it be that some of them fall victim to conspiracy channels? All of those things are true. But you see how the media frames this. Only Fox News was trusted. That's incredible. They say Republicans' second most trusted source, ABC News, wasn't even a close second. This finding stands in stark contrast with the view of Democrats who said they trusted a variety of news sources. And it marks a further decline in Republicans' trust of other news sources since Pew last conducted a similar survey in 2014. It's actually quite amazing because I've gone over this poll before. This is from last year, actually. And of course, they just give you corporate press. Republicans, of course, trust Fox News because Fox News gives them, their opinions is confirmation bias, but they're not giving you independent media. In fact, they don't even talk about smaller, more establishment channels. Or I'll tell you this, I don't necessarily see in this the Washington Examiner, the Daily Caller, or the Daily Wire, or Ben Shapiro. Then 538 frames it as though Republicans just don't trust the press. They do, just not yours. You see, what's happening nowadays is that you have two groups of people, the discerning and the uninitiated. Uninitiated people don't understand what's going on around them. They turn on CNN and say, there's the news, and they care about their business. I encounter these people from time to time. I had a woman recently tell me that she loved Kamala Harris. And I was like, well, you're not going to like my show then, because I do not like her. And she was like, well, that's fine. You can have a different opinion, but what's not to like about her? And I was like, I don't know. The keeping minorities in prison past their sentence to use as slave labor to fight wildfires is a big... I didn't say it like that. I was like, look, she kept minority prison inmates in prison past their release date because she wanted to use them to fight wildfires at $1 an hour. I'm sure the people of California loved the fact that they had slaves fighting their wildfires for them, but I'm not a fan of that. And am I being hyperbolic? No. The 13th Amendment, which bans slavery, literally says you can have slaves so long as they're imprisoned. So Kamala Harris knew exactly what she was doing. Sorry. But I encounter these people. They don't know. I don't blame them. I'd love to invite them to learn, but they're not interested in the stuff. They turn on the TV and there's good old Brian Stelter saying Donald Trump is bad. And we're all suffering because of it. Fox News, let me tell you what they said. What I love about Brian Stelter is that he basically on CNN just gives us the Fox News review show. I can watch Fox News myself, guy. I don't need you to tell me what they said for me. I do think it's fascinating, though. You see, the mainstream media is this bizarro reality, and Brian Stelter is, in effect, a kind of bizarro me in a certain sense. Now, we're not completely the same, but Brian Stelter goes on CNN, and he's the media correspondent, so he criticizes the media, which basically means he complains about Fox News because his audience is completely biased, and he can't insult them for being dumb. He just says, Fox News is bad. Listen, if you're a media critic for the establishment, the only media to criticize is Fox News. How long are you going to do that for? That's dumb. I suppose you can then pull up Breitbart and the Daily Caller and the Daily Wire. Sure, I guess. Now, for someone like me who's generally just anti-establishment, I have criticized some conservative outlets some of the time. Sometimes. Usually they're not NewsGuard certified, and I just ignore it. I use NewsGuard for a reason. My criticism is with the establishment, not with small conservative outlets. So I'll use NewsGuard certified conservative outlets, and I typically don't for outlets that aren't certified by NewsGuard. NewsGuard is establishment biased. I use their own sources, often to fact check them and criticize them like I'm doing right here. The Examiner, by the way, which is conservative, is absolutely certified. It's on purpose. You see, I'm criticizing the establishment, and there's so much to criticize. Brian Stelter complaining about Fox News, you're punching down. I get it. Fox News is the biggest network right now. They get the most ratings, but it's nothing compared to the entirety of the establishment press. So while Fox News has done things I criticize, what's there to complain about? Tucker Carlson tends to get it right, but I've done, I think, like 2 or 3 segments criticizing Tucker Carlson in the past month or two. There was the issue with one New York Times journalist. I criticized him over, and I criticized him over his stance on pregnant people serving in the military. I get the conservative opinion. I disagree with it. For the most part, I think Tucker tries to get his facts right and does a pretty good job. In fact, he's probably the best person on TV because of this. Could there be better? Yeah. And unfortunately, there should be, but there isn't. And it's their fault because they've become caricatures of the media. So here's where we are. People come to my channel. Thank you very much. If you like the show, go to timcast.com, sign up, become a member, share these segments. There are people who reach outside the box. They find new sources of information and they get a collection of different opinions. I find it very fascinating. There's an overlap between my channel and Jimmy Dore, and it's one of the coolest things ever. Why? Well, Jimmy's awesome. I have tremendous respect for Jimmy Dore. I disagree with him on a lot of politics, and we disagreed to each other, just like I've disagreed with Steven Crowder. But Jimmy is an honest guy who genuinely believes what he believes and genuinely fights for and challenges the establishment. And for some reason is mostly poking at Democrats. Why? They're the establishment along with the corporate press. So there are people there's an overlap between some of my audience in Crowder's and some of my audience in Jimmy Dore. Isn't it amazing that there are people who watch Crowder and Jimmy Dore? Because you can have a dumb political opinion as long as you're being honest to the best of your abilities. And there's trust there. I trust that if Jimmy gets something wrong, he genuinely made a mistake. and he will correct it if it comes up. I know that if Crowder gets something wrong, he made a mistake and he will correct it. And you can trust, and I will tell you this, when I get things wrong, I do issue corrections, even sometimes without prompt. I'll put an editor's note saying, I feel like I wasn't clear enough on this point. I want to make sure everybody understands, because if I got this wrong, it's important you know. And I will always tell people, watch Jimmy, watch Crowder, and watch CNN. Learn what they're saying, and then come watch his other channels. There are people who are willing to do that. Get their opinion from someone who's very much pro-universal health care. Get their opinion from Crowder, who's very much against universal health care. And then get their opinion from someone who's a rather milquetoast fence sitter, as the joke goes, leaning slightly left, saying, universal health care would be great, I just don't know if it's feasible. It's a wide array of voices that the average person can get their information from. Not mainstream press. Not CNN, not NBC, not ABC. So conservatives, remarkably, are getting their information from a mixed bag. And so they're actually seeing a multitude of perspectives. And because of this, they're going, hey, the media's lying. Many of them will only watch Steven Crowder, still better than just Fox News. But you see how they frame it, what they say about people. If you just watch the mainstream media, I have to wonder this. I've been saying quite a bit on Twitter lately that I feel like the future is going to be extremely progressive just because Republicans don't have the political willpower to fight back. So I was like, by 2030, the Republican Party is going to be a bunch of socialist, pro-trans, pro-gay marriage, all of these progressive opinions. And then the Democrats are going to be otherkin communists, because that seems to be the direction things tend to shift. I could be wrong, though. The mainstream narrative from these cable networks and these corporations and TV channels is old school. Their ratings are tanking. They're all talking about how their ratings are going down, and I'm like, my ratings are going up. I mean, granted, during the election, of course, it was nuts. Viewership was nuts for everybody. And it's gone down for everybody, including myself. But we've actually, here at Timcast IRL, we've been improving, growing. We're hiring. We're expanding. We've got so much opportunity for expansion. It's making my head spin. These other companies are like, we're kind of hurting. Things are going bad. I wonder if in 10 years, CNN won't even exist anymore. Or they'll just be like a blog. And these other big corporate channels won't survive. You take a look at The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. They're trying to make Trevor Noah come out like a YouTuber, like the kind of stuff I do. He's in his room, he's got TV behind him, and he's like, hey, look what's happening. And he cracks jokes, and it's just not funny or interesting. And you take a look at what's doing really, really well. Channels like this. You know what I will say is fascinating? There's a lot of people in media who seem to think, because of the style of my videos, as just in a room with the thing pulled up, the screen grab, and I'm talking, it must be a guy in his basement. Not realizing that we are a massive operation with 12+ employees at this point and expanding. And we're already talking to people about funding TV shows and new podcasts, new staff, expansion. There are even people at Fox, they seem to think, I've had conservative outlets who seem to think this is some small-time operation. No, we've got 3 different shows, which is just basically my commentary, and we're going to be expanding more. And we're going to be huge. And we are going to be that space for legitimate, moderate discussion, and even some left-leaning opinion that isn't woke. Real conversations from honest people. That's what we're building. Conservatives, of course, too. Because I want to have just like a fair conversation. Sometimes conservatives are right. Oh, surprise. Sometimes liberals are right. Wow, shocking. The problem is the media just says whatever the left wants to hear. Liberals and the leftists. And thus they create a feedback loop of psychotic nonsense and then throw red meat to these people. I love it. They would call me a grifter. While AOC is the one now claiming that the child detention centers are influx facilities, to which she previously called them concentration camps. I've always maintained they weren't, and they still aren't. They have always been child detention facilities. It's amazing to get a little mental or intellectual consistency, isn't it? You don't get it from the media. You get sophistry and attempts at justification. Sorry, man. If I see an opinion come out from conservatives I don't agree with, I'm going to say I don't agree with it. When Tucker Carlson came out and said, flight suits for pregnant women, this is crazy. Or, I said, actually, I like the idea that everybody can serve. They're not all going to be in combat or flying. I have no problem with that. What you'll get from the progressives is something entirely different. Save Jimmy Dore, because he's a good dude. I respect him. When you go on YouTube, there's a variety of opinions. Now, YouTube is not perfect. They censor people. But if you're getting your information from YouTube, you will more likely have a healthy, balanced view. That's not without its problems. There's a lot of people who believe in lizard people in the flat earth and all this other crazy stuff. But if you're a discerning individual, okay, and you have to balance what you see from people like me on YouTube as well as the mainstream media, then you will have a robust media knowledge, a better idea of what's going on. It's not always that easy, but I'll tell you this. Don't get all of your news from one source. Don't get it from just me or just Crowder or just Jimmy. Watch as many people as you can, and even make sure you're tuning in to regular old mainstream press. Otherwise, you'll fall into a bubble. That's not a good thing. I try to be as balanced as I possibly can. And I shouldn't say balanced. I try to be honest and understand the perspectives as the best I can do. The media, not so much. They're too busy dealing with their post-Trump stress disorder. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. That is my other channel, which is more bigger news of the day. And this one's more like, I don't know, nitty gritty in the weeds, philosophy and things like that. And sometimes just general grievances, I suppose. But yeah, I think I might be talking about Chauvin. We'll see what happens. That'll be up at 4 p.m. youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.